Hello, everybody. How are you today? I apologize for being a little bit late. Um, I was taking Loki out. Um, Sorry, I had a pop up that I was reading as well. So, who here knows about the Piketon Massacre? Um, Taking off my hoodie, sorry. It's probably why I'm sick because I keep taking the dog out in shorts and a hoodie. But let's do a really quick YouTube poll. Once I get my YouTube up, I should have thought to do this beforehand, and I didn't think. There we go. Start a poll. Have you heard of? All right. So there's our poll. I'm gonna leave it up while we cover a few different things about the case. Um, I am going to go over some of the basics. I have a small little playlist that I put together for everybody, just kind of to get you up to speed um, on the case, kind of up to now. So we'll watch a couple shorter videos, a couple longer videos, um, and we'll also get to George the Third, his pretrial hearing. George, aka Billy Wagner, is the patriarch of the Wagner family. And he is currently sitting accused of assisting three other people in his family of murdering 8 people of the Rhoden family, um, April 21st into April 22nd of 2016. This whole case started over a custody dispute. Go figure. And what makes this case so insane is that 8 members of the same family were murdered at 3 separate locations. And if I remember correctly, it was like 2.5 miles apart from scene 1 to scene 3. So it wasn't a like, you know, something that was just random. Um, Straight from the beginning, it pointed to something that was, deliberate, something that was at least pre-planned to some extent. And the facets of this case are absolutely insane. It took 2 years for the Wagners to get arrested. And all of the absolutely insane things that were happening from the beginning of this case to when they got arrested, just, it's crazy. Like, they would talk about these murders cryptically over the phone. And I don't know. And the Wagners even moved to Alaska. All of the children in the home were safe. It was just all of the adults. Um, So, before I start coughing in everybody's ear, we will go ahead and start jumping into the first of the videos. So keep in mind, this first video is from about 2 years ago, I believe. Yes, 2 years ago. So this is when the members of the Wagner family first got arrested. I'm going to play another one from roughly 2 years ago from very local as well, because that gives a little bit more in depth. And then I'm going to jump into the Wagner pre-trial hearing for Billy Wagner, and then we will finish off with a Vinnie Politan series that was really good. That's like 40 some minutes. As long as we can get to that. Otherwise, I'll save it for the next live that I do. But that one explains in more detail what really led to the Wagner's arrest and everything like that. So without further ado, let's jump into the Piketon Massacre.
We believe the evidence will show that the suspect spent months planning the crimes.
A horrific crime rocks the foothills of the Appalachian Mountains in southeast Ohio. 8 members of the Rhoden and Gilly families executed in one night.
My brothers were good people. They would give you the shirt off their back.
Years later, another family, the Wagners, are charged with the murders.
They studied the victims' habits and their routines.
Now George Wagner IV is on trial for his role in the killings and the plot to carry out the murders. I'm Anjanette Levy, and welcome to this special edition of Law and Crime Sidebar Podcast, where I'm going to tell you about this case that we're going to be covering coming up here on Law and Crime. We've actually been covering it all week long. This is a case that I've covered since day one, since April 22nd of 2016. And you know, I remember very clearly, it was a Friday morning and I had worked a night shift the night before. I came in around 10 a.m. to the newsroom, and the news director looked at me and said, "Get in the car, you're going to Pike County."
Have you ever tried to visit a website only to have like 90% of it taken up by ads? Pi.org is a web browser extension that lets you decide what ads you see on what websites. But here's the twist.
7 people in one family have been murdered. And I just thought to myself, oh my goodness, first of all. And second of all, I didn't really know where Pike County was. It was a county on the very, very outer edge of our viewing area. We just didn't cover that area, but it was right across the county line from another county called Adams County that was in our viewing area. And really the only time I had ever been out there was when I would drive through there to go to Ohio University in Athens, Ohio. So I went out there. There were police cars everywhere, sheriff's deputies' cars everywhere, blocking off Union Hill Road, where this crime happened, where 7 of the family members were shot in the head. Most of these people were shot in the head. Some were not, but they were shot in their sleep. It's just an awful, awful case. And we want to tell you a little bit about how this whole thing unfolded and how it began.
There's blood all over the house. Okay. My brother-in-law's in the bedroom.
A chilling 911 call on the morning of April 22nd, 2016, led to the largest criminal investigation in Ohio history. Bobby Jo Manley found her brother-in-law, Chris Rhoden Sr., and his cousin Gary dead in Chris's trailer. In another mobile home on Union Hill Road, Chris Sr.'s ex-wife Dana and their children, Hannah Mae and Chris Jr., shot in the head as they slept. Hannah Mae's newborn baby was unharmed next to her. Chris and Dana's son Frankie and his fiancée, Hannah Hazel Gilly, were also shot, their 6-month-old baby boy in bed with them, covered in blood. Frankie's toddler son and the baby were unharmed. Then, hours later,
I just found my cousin with a gunshot wound.
An eighth victim, Kenneth Rhoden, found shot in the eye in his camper several miles away. Rumors spread that the Mexican drug cartel had committed the murders since Chris and Kenneth had marijuana grow operations. A year later, with few solid leads, the Rhoden family matriarch, Geneva Rhoden, issued a public plea.
If there's someone out there that knows anything about what happened, would they please come forward?
The following month, something led investigators to a farm where Angela, Jake, and George Wagner had lived. They had recently sold it and planned to move to Alaska. Their belongings were stored at another property and were also searched. Investigators also searched the sprawling Flying W horse farm where Billy Wagner's parents raised horses. Jake Wagner was the father of Hannah Mae Rhoden's oldest daughter, and after Hannah was murdered, Jake was awarded custody of the little girl. More than a year later, in November 2018, Billy, Angela, George, and Jake Wagner were charged with the murders.
There certainly was obsession with custody, obsession with control of children.
The Attorney General said the murders were planned meticulously, with the Wagners hacking into the Rhodens' social media accounts to surveil them. The motive? Custody of the little girl that Jake Wagner shared with Hannah Rhoden.
I just might tell you this is just the most bizarre story I've ever seen in being involved in law enforcement. I mean, when the entire story, as it will unfold at trial, it is just, it's just amazing.
Then, more than 2 years later, on the 5th anniversary of the murders in 2021, a shock.
I am guilty, Your Honor.
Jake Wagner admitted that he and his family planned and carried out the murders over custody of his daughter. He'll spend the rest of his life in prison. Months later, Angela Wagner was the next domino to fall. Jake and Angela have agreed to testify against Billy and George. George claiming he's not guilty because he didn't actually shoot anyone, and his lawyers stating in court documents that he only went along that night fearing that their father Billy might kill Jake.
George did not shoot or kill anybody that's a named victim in this case. He did not pull a trigger once. Jake, on the other hand, has admitted to killing at least 5 people personally and shooting a 6th.
Prosecutors say George Wagner is just as responsible as the rest of the family.
Unfortunately, there's more than one devil in this case, and that is all 4 of the individuals who are charged in this matter. Again, Jake at least provided some peace to the victims in this family, and that was a very strong motivator for us in resolving his case in the way that we did. George has not done that.
When George Wagner and Billy Wagner, Angela, and Jake were all charged with these murders, there were other family members who were charged with lesser crimes. One of them was Frederica Wagner, and she is the grandmother to Jake and George, the mother of Billy, and she was charged with obstruction of justice and perjury. Prosecutors had said she lied about purchasing a bullet-resistant vest for Billy Wagner to the grand jury. Frederica always said she didn't lie about that and that she did purchase it to offer him some protection. But prosecutors say, and they still believe, I guess, that she is lying and that they could refile the charges. The other family member charged is Rita Newcomb, who is the grandmother to Jake and George Wagner. She was charged with obstruction of justice for lying to the grand jury, according to prosecutors, and then also with forgery. The prosecutors had said she lied about forging custody documents related to this case. She was a notary, and her notary seal was on those custody documents. Well, turns out that Rita Newcomb came clean at a hearing and pleaded guilty to a misdemeanor obstruction charge and agreed to testify against her family members. So she will be testifying next week against George Wagner and then later his father, Billy Wagner, at trial. Opening statements are set for the morning of September 6th. That's a Tuesday morning, the day after Labor Day. And despite Pike County being really small, there are between 27,000 and 28,000 people who live there. It's really small. They were actually able to seat a jury in that county. It's made up of 9 women and 3 men. The alternates are made up of 5 women and 1 man. So this is mostly women that will be hearing the evidence in this case. And really, to understand this case and the victims who died, I think you have to know a little bit about the area where they lived. As I mentioned, this is in the foothills of the Appalachian Mountains, and it's really an area that's seen a lot of challenges. It's not a wealthy area. And I spoke with former Deputy Attorney General for the state of Ohio, Mark Weaver, about the area. He's actually tried cases out there.
So this is a rural Appalachian poor white county in southern part of Ohio. And it might be the poorest county in the state. If it's not the poorest, it's among the top 3 or 4 poorest counties. The courthouse is old and dated. The county employees do not make a lot of money. Like so many Appalachian counties in America, the opioid drug epidemic has hit hard. There's a lot of job loss. And so this, what national focus will come to a town that is just barely making it in a county that is rarely inside anybody's spotlight.
So this case, 8 people murdered in the middle of the night. It seems almost like a given that you would get the death penalty in this case. But, the state still has to obviously prove its case, do its job. They seem to think, from everything we've heard in court, that they have a very strong case. It would appear that way. But George Wagner claims, I didn't kill anybody. I didn't actually pull the trigger, so I shouldn't be convicted. But that's not how it works in Ohio.
No, it doesn't. And we're still not sure whether the death penalty is going to go forward in this case, largely to see who testifies. So for the viewers and listeners who don't know, the allegations are that this Wagner family was a criminal enterprise that met together and decided to go out and commit mass murder. This is a little bit like the Hatfields and the McCoys. This is a little bit like one family being very angry at another family. And the Wagner family, according to prosecutors, was a criminal enterprise. And as a result, some of the folks in the family have already pled guilty and are willing to testify against the 2 remaining defendants. And if they do so, then the death penalty will be taken off the table. If they don't, there still is the ability to bring the death penalty, at least for some of these defendants.
But it's not just that they have to testify. Like the part of the agreement I find interesting, it's to the satisfaction of the state. That's how it's worded.
Yeah, that's a big catch-all. Normally we say truthfully testify, but when you say to the satisfaction of the state, that gives the prosecutors the sole judgment on whether or not to bring the death penalty charges. Now, it's hard to do a death penalty case. I had prosecuted here on the Law and Crime Network a death penalty case against the serial killer Sean Great a few years ago. It's very complicated. There's a lot of moving parts. Frankly, most prosecutors would rather not bring a capital case because of the additional layers of procedure and appeal built in. Having said that, this case rocked the region when this happened. The notion of going in and killing everybody except the babies, including a couple of teenagers, really got people's attention. And I think it's going to get the country's attention when this trial starts.
Now, this was a massive investigation that took investigators from Ohio to Alaska and many points in between. There are actually 264 potential witnesses in this case, some of them actually federal law enforcement officials who assisted. And the evidence includes digital computer evidence, ballistics, shoe impression evidence, and there were also a number of wiretaps in this case. And there's other evidence that it's included too. Now, prosecutors have said that they have evidence that the Wagners hacked into the Rhoden's social media accounts in an effort to surveil them. And they also say that Angela Wagner has admitted buying Walmart gym shoes for her sons to wear to specifically carry out this murder or this set of murders. And Jake Wagner had admitted to committing the murders, shooting 5 of the victims, killing them, shooting a 6th. And then he also led prosecutors to a truck that they purchased just to carry out these murders. So I spoke with Joseph Scott Morgan, a forensic death investigator, about the evidence and the challenges of investigating a case like this.
I went by the Wagner farmhouse, and it's this kind of interesting multi-storied home that was built many, many years ago. And it looks, it's got a very, I have to say, it's got a very Norman Rockwell kind of appeal to it when you see it. But then you think about what went on, within those walls, because you're talking about a group of people, a family group, that sat around a kitchen table, perhaps, or in the front room, or on the front porch, and allegedly they planned the slaughter of another family. And it wasn't just like they go into, some kind of single room, like Scarface, and wipe everybody else. This is meticulous, where they're going from location to location to location to location. And then prior to that, you got all the prep work. Remember, the mother has already stated, that, she's admitted her guilt in this particular case. She's gone out and coordinated things, and we've talked about shoes, I think, a little bit. That's come up in pretrial, how shoes were purchased in order to facilitate this, that would be footwear that had not previously been worn, that, she would buy all together. There was the acquisition of weaponry, a vehicle, comes into play. So all of the logistical issues that have to come into play were there. And not to mention, the route would have to be planned.
Also expected to testify at the trial is George Wagner IV's ex-wife. Her name is Tabitha Claytor, and she's expected to testify that when she left George Wagner and got a divorce, that the family coerced her into signing over custody of their son to the Wagner families, and that basically she was isolated from her son after being pressured to do that. Some of the other evidence in this case includes a Facebook message that prosecutors have cited in prior court hearings. And in this message, Hannah Mae Rhoden was talking to Tabitha Claytor's mother. And Tabitha Claytor's mother said to Hannah Rhoden in this message, do not sign over custody of your child, because she was being pressured to do so by the Wagner family. And in that message, Hannah Rhoden said to Tabitha Claytor's mother, they will have to kill me first. This is a Facebook message that was revealed in a court hearing in August of 2020. It was cited during that hearing, and there was testimony about it. And interestingly enough, that Facebook message between Hannah Rhoden and Tabitha Claytor's mother took place in December of 2015, about 5 months before the homicides. And there was testimony also that Angela Wagner had found that Facebook message by surveilling those Facebook accounts and showed it to Jake Wagner. And apparently the plot unfolded from there. So this will really be something to watch. And the Rhoden family will be there every day, along with the Manley family and the Gilley families, seeking justice for their loved ones. That's it for this edition of Law and Crime Sidebar Podcast. It is produced by Sam Goldberg and Michael Deininger.
Okay, now the absolute severity of this is just heartbreaking. And the manner that was used, I mean, it's just crazy. The fact that they were able to get Tabitha's son off of her, and then they decided to do it again to Hannah Mae. I can't even begin to get into all of the narcissistic traits that Angela holds, not to mention the sociopathic ones. You know, what kind of a person takes people's children from them and raises them as their own when these are your grandkids? They're not even your kids. What type of person takes a child away from their parents? And the fact that for a really long time. Even when Jake had custody of Sophia, Angela was raising Sophia as her own. um, there was testimony from Jake's wife. Give me 1 second, I'm gonna cough. Sorry, I didn't want to cough in everybody's ear. But there was even testimony from Jake's wife, Elizabeth, um, about some of the strange behavior that Angela exhibited, including having Sophia sleep with her, even while they were in Alaska, which is just so strange. I understand, wanting to protect your grandchildren and wanting to make sure that your grandchildren are safe and things like that. But this really goes beyond that. I do want to do a little bit more digging into some of the potential symptoms that Angela exhibited. I have been kind of doing some research on that, and I really have come across that it is very narcissistic, um, that it does show some sociopathic tendencies. And please know that I am not diagnosing anybody. I am just giving a list of things that kind of encompass some of what Angela was showing. Um, and to sit here and, you know, um, really be able to
I woke up to a new
be
friend.
willing to kill for something like this is just crazy to me. I apologize. I'm quickly getting this set up for us. I can get it to start where I want it to. There we go. Let's see. Oh, of course it's going to give me another ad. As soon as I am past all of these ads, we'll start our next video. There we go. All right. So I'm going to shut up and I'm going to let this play.
There's never been a case in Ohio history like this.
The fear of retaliation from whoever these killers are, that's real, and people feel that.
This has affected the entire community.
8 dead. All 8 were members of the Rhoden family.
And all kinds of rumors were coming to the surface.
For all I know, it could have been somebody that came up and hugged me at the funeral. I don't trust anybody at all.
Those that were close to the Rhoden family stopped talking to the media. It just became this really strange situation where time was passing, no answers.
It just chills you to think about the calculation that goes into something like this.
The county commissioner said, people come to us as county leaders and think that we have all the answers. He said, we didn't know anything. Pike County is southeastern Ohio, about 60 miles east of Cincinnati. It's relatively flat to begin, very rural. Then you sort of get into the Appalachian side of that part of southeastern Ohio, and it becomes filled with hills and valleys and pretty rugged terrain. Having grown up not terribly far away from there. It's a bit off the beaten path, but certainly people who live there love it, and generational families, stay in those kinds of areas for a long time.
Breaking news out of Pike County, Ohio. A mass shooting today in different locations. We have team coverage today here
on the morning of April 22nd, 2016. Police are called to Union Hill Road in Pike County, Ohio.
There's blood all over the house. Okay. My brother-in-law's in the bedroom and I beat the hell out of him.
Never have we lost so many people to a murder or murderers in this county.
6 adults and 1 teenager are found murdered execution style across 3 properties. They're all members of the same family, the Rhoden family.
A number of members of the Rhoden family live in a certain way, kind of together, in their own separate spaces, as families often do in rural settings. They lived in a part of Pike County that bordered some other counties. This is a family that clearly is incredibly close-knit.
Cousins Christopher Rhoden Sr. and Gary Rhoden are found dead at the same location. Christopher's ex-wife, Dana Rhoden, is discovered at her home with 2 of their 3 children, Hannah Rhoden and 16-year-old Christopher Rhoden Jr. The bodies of their 3rd child, Clarence Frankie Rhoden, and his fiancée, Hannah Gilly, are found at a 3rd property on the same street.
Sources were reaching out saying, hey, you need to head east. We arrived at Union Hill Road, where it was all cordoned off. I recall talking to one police officer saying, hey, do you think that we're safe standing here? One officer said, you don't have anything to worry about. And I think as the hours went on, I recall asking a similar question to another officer, and that gentleman said, I really don't know.
I just found my cousin with a gunshot wound.
Hours later, authorities discover the body of an 8th victim, Christopher Rhoden Sr.'s older brother, Kenneth, several miles away.
Multiple shots were fired against these victims. I understand more than about 30 shots in all at these different locations.
Each one of the victims appears to have been executed. Each one of the victims appears to be shot in the head.
There were 3 small children that survived this ordeal that were found next to these lifeless bodies.
This includes a 6-month-old, a 3-year-old, and a days-old newborn. The only child belonging to any of the victims not present at the time of the murders is Hannah Rhoden's daughter. The 2-year-old is with her father, Edward Jake Wagner.
Pastor Phil Fulton says members of the Rhoden family used to attend church at Union Hill and says he knew one of the deceased victims very well.
We know that Chris and Dana had divorced some years ago, but had still remained good friends, lived close together.
Very hardworking mother, loved her kids, and she would have done anything for her kids.
This was a pre-planned execution of 8 individuals. It was a sophisticated operation, and those who carried it out were trying to do everything that they could do to hinder the investigation and their prosecution.
Mike DeWine is Ohio's Attorney General. He would be elected the state's governor in 2018.
Governor DeWine immediately got the Bureau of Criminal Investigation, the top agency in the state, to come down and be right in the thick of what was happening and to start figuring this out along with deputies and the sheriff's office.
The Rhodens' brutal killings rocked the small county. Who could have wanted this family dead and why? The investigation is one of the most extensive in Ohio's history.
We have received over 100 tips. We've conducted between 50 and 60 interviews, and interviews are continuing right now as we speak. There have been over 100 personnel involved in this investigation.
God, that you would help lift them up. Lord, that you would look over this community. God, that you would bless our community.
This community changed forever by unthinkable violence. Pray together in solidarity.
Each of them lived full, wonderful lives, even though they were taken too soon. They were the best people to know. They were all kind and full of love. We pray for quick justice and that a tragedy of this magnitude never touches any of y'all's families.
The loved ones that I talked to days and weeks after the crimes, they just, couldn't even How can he comprehend something like that?
But when someone takes 8 of them away from me at one time, it's hard.
Very sad day. Rough. This is the worst thing I've ever went through with. I'd like for them to find out who done it.
But days after the killings, a shocking discovery provides the first real clue in the case. A shocking discovery provides the first real clue in the case.
I think it's okay for us to confirm that we did find marijuana in 3 locations. These are grow operations.
The community begins to speculate that a drug cartel could have played a role, given the precise nature of the murders.
The sheriff and everybody knows that there was a grow operation of mega amounts of plants. I mean, you know, this is a drug pipeline.
It has aspects to it of a professional hit. But I don't think it was a cartel hit or anything like that.
Fear of the unknown and just the awfulness of this crime, it was not lost on anybody.
I want to urge everyone to be under the understanding that there is a strong possibility that any individuals involved with this are armed and extremely dangerous.
Sheriff Chuck Reeder was right there by Governor Mike DeWine's side because the public clearly needed to know how much they needed to protect themselves since all these people had been murdered.
I can tell you, if you are fearful, arm yourself.
If the top law enforcement officer in the county is saying this, does he know more? Does he think that people may be in imminent danger? I mean, there's no help coming in 5 minutes. If you live in a city, that might be the case. Generally, that's not the case when you're out in these places that are more remote.
The killers are still out there, and the fear spreading through the community casts a shadow on the funeral proceedings.
We'll have more police on standby just for safety reasons. No concerns, there's no threats.
The Rhoden family would like to thank everyone for all the outpouring of prayers and support for their family.
Anything that shows movement of cars around that period of time, that night and that early morning, would be helpful. But it's not just limited to cars. Any other video that they think might have value.
Initially, there was not much to go with at all as far as evidence is concerned.
People's, concern as to why, what drove someone to do this or why it happened.
By the spring of 2017, authorities receive more than 800 tips and conduct more than 400 interviews. But the lack of arrests frustrates local residents, particularly once the 1-year anniversary of the killings arrives with no clear answers.
It's been hell. All the time. It's been the worst.
It's still talked about quite a bit in the local community, and it's makes you weary, could you be next?
You came in like thieves in the night and took 8 lives, some being children, in the most horrific way I've ever seen in my 20-plus years. We are getting closer. We will find you.
We're not in any position to charge anyone or take any case to a grand jury. But, a few weeks ago, we had a real uptick in the information.
The AG's office is not saying how these 4 people may be possibly connected to the case, but many are hoping information will lead to justice. The Attorney General and Pike County Sheriff are calling for any and all information about these people: 46-year-old George Billy Wagner III, 46-year-old Angela Wagner, 25-year-old George Wagner IV, and 24-year-old Edward Jake Wagner. Officials say Jake Wagner is the father of victim Hannah Rhoden's daughter.
In 2017, state investigators publicized photos of the Wagner family and said, hey, if you know anything about these folks, let us know.
The authorities stress that the Wagners have not been named suspects or people of interest in the killings.
The Wagners moved to Alaska, of all places. Obviously a bit odd to go from southeastern Ohio to a long ways away. And at the time, it was Jake had indicated he wanted to sort of shield the daughter he had with Hannah Rhoden from the awfulness of what had happened.
It isn't the only lead investigators are chasing.
It's scary. We're hearing all over the news about how they're investigating this place and the SWAT team's going in here and going in there.
I recall talking to the father of Dana, and it was like, this, I don't know what's going on. This doesn't make any sense.
I've been kind of upset at the cop from day one.
Investigators obviously were looking at everything that they had been involved with and what their histories were and their interactions were to see if maybe somebody close to the family had done this. And I do think that in that particular instance, there was a lot of grief and like, look, we didn't do this.
I feel that every news conference that we do, that the killers are watching and they're listening and they're trying to find just as you guys are where we're at and what we're doing, and that's partly why we share no information.
At some point, you sort of say, well, if nobody's going to say anything, then we just got to get about our lives, and no more violence had happened. So I think that it was a situation of people assuming that this was sort of a targeted thing. So yeah, it did sort of die down.
Then, in November of 2018, 2.5 years after the murders, there's a major break in the case.
They did this quickly, coldly, calmly, and very carefully. But not carefully enough.
Breaking news.
We begin with a huge break in the brutal murders of 8 members of the Rhoden family in Pike County.
Today we have the answer. Members of one family conspired, planned, carried out, and then allegedly covered up their violent act to wipe out members of another family.
Arrests were happening in the Rhoden family murders, the Pike County Massacre. So I remember that day pretty vividly. Suddenly it was like, drop that, you got to go to Lexington. So our station started to send crews all over the place. It's like, go to Scioto, go to Ross County.
4 members of the Wagner family are arrested in separate locations in connection with the murders. Each face the possibility of the death penalty.
Billy, Angela, their sons, George and Jake, all charged with 8 counts of murder. And there were multiple other counts, I believe around 22 charges in all.
Other charges include conspiracy, tampering with evidence, and interception of communications.
Before accused murderer Jake Wagner entered the courtroom today, loved ones of those he and his family are charged with killing embraced in a show of solidarity. Today's arraignment ended with attorneys entering a plea of not guilty, which Wagner affirmed.
Jake Wagner's parents and older brother also plead not guilty. The community is divided on the Wagners' possible involvement in the murders.
Well, we certainly think they weren't doing their jobs.
Do people feel like they got the right folks?
Yeah, I think so. I think them running made a big deal with it, but, who's to tell? Some people in my family thinks it's different people.
When they have the trial, if it's proven that they've done it, whatever they come up with, it's too good for them.
Now we're really going to start seeing how angry the community is over this, especially for how well known both families were. Dimitri, no. No. Dimitri, thank you. I apologize. My son is wanting to be where Mama is, and he's trying to also play The Floor is Lava. But, both families were very well respected within the community, and it's really heartbreaking to see where these families have ended. And honestly, I have to say that I kind of agree with the community that the plea deals that the Wagner family has received so far and the mercy that they were shown is far too good for them. They put so much planning into this. Like, I watched George IV's trial. And wow, to see how intricately bound this family was and how much they truly worked together, each family member playing their own part, each family member being able to surveil and, add their own little spin on this was just sick to watch. Billy Wagner attempting to um is attempting to get a change of venue. He just had a change of judges. And honestly, this judge seems really fair. But I do also see where Billy's attorney is coming from, where they don't feel that the community in Piketon can remain objective. Although I truly don't feel that the community is biased, I just see that the community is potentially seeing these bits and pieces of evidence for exactly what they are. Um, and that is that the evidence clearly shows that this family did exactly what they set out to do in their pre-planning. Um, and it's so strange to see that this family was so intricately woven together, even as adults. It's weird to see. Has anybody else seen a family dynamic quite like this? Where they even share like bank accounts and stuff like that as adults?
Authorities allege that the Wagners developed contingency plans in case they were caught.
They were to take revenge against anyone who went against them, including but not limited to Special Agent Scheider, Sheriff Reeder, and Attorney General Mike DeWine. There was also discussions of how they would try to make an escape.
I've seen their work. I know what they're capable of. We've been very cautious, making sure.
Now, part of those contingency plans included documentation stating that Angela Wagner would end up with Sophia in Bovine if anything happened to George and Jake Wagner. And it was supposedly, there was also supposedly one for Hannah Mae too. And it was supposedly signed by Hannah Mae, but what actually got them was the printed date at the very bottom of the paper. It'll usually tell you when a document was printed, and the print date on it was in 2016, after the date that Hannah Mae had supposedly signed. Which was odd. It was one of the key pieces of evidence that had gotten George IV convicted. And so I'm really interested to see what all is going to come into play for Billy Wagner's trial. I'm also interested to see if for this trial they are going to show Jake and Angela. Jake and Angela opted to not be shown or heard for the first trial of George IV. And just to recap, Jake and Angela sold out the rest of the family to save their own asses. Mostly Jake was the biggest martyr of the family because he did rat out the family first. But he stated that he was only going to do that to remove the death penalty for all of his family. And so nobody will be facing the death penalty, only life in prison. And Angela just did it to save her ass. A typical narcissistic move. She did it after Jake did. And she did it apparently from all reports without knowing that Jake had ratted out his entire family. How much of that is true, I don't know. But she did it for a very selfish reason, stating that she wanted the death penalty off of the table for herself. And if I remember correctly, she ended up with reduced charges. So I believe that she's only facing like 40 or 50 years in prison, which is still basically a life sentence for her. But let's get back to the video. We're almost done with that, and then we'll jump into George III, Billy Wagner's pretrial hearing.
That security plans have been in place in my home and others.
For the Rhodens' loved ones, the road to justice is far from over.
As time went on and you started to learn in some of these court filings, there was just cameras that have been tampered with, allegedly, these types of things, silencers, it started to put some of the pieces of the puzzle together.
We believe the evidence will show that suspects spent months planning the crimes. They studied the victims' habits and their routines. They knew the layouts of their homes. They knew where they slept. And then after executing each victim, we believe the evidence will further show that the suspects tampered with the evidence, such as the victims' phones and the surveillance cameras on their properties.
Frederica Wagner, Billy Wagner's mother, is also accused of trying to cover up the crimes. So is Angela Wagner's mother, Rita Newcomb, who is a notary.
Ms. Newcomb was charged with 3 counts of forgery regarding 3 separate custody documents that are at issue in this case.
Members of the Rhoden family claim that Jake tried to get Hannah to sign over her rights to their daughter weeks before the killings, but she refused.
At that point, investigators had said, hey, listen, this is about the custody of a child. Much to the disbelief of many people, it was a domino that fell that sort of put things into a clearer focus. And we talked to Frederica, and she absolutely maintained the family's innocent.
I don't know who killed those people. I didn't know them.
Authorities seized 2 bulletproof vests purchased by Frederica Wagner, generating a new inquiry.
I bought them after the crime, after the tragedy, 2 weeks later, and we proved that.
But when Frederica's case was being heard and there were conversations and closed-door meetings with attorneys, they decided to effectively let that case go.
Then, in late 2019, news breaks that a member of the family has taken a plea deal.
No, I just feel that it's not a good Christian thing to lie, and I couldn't live with it no more.
Newcomb pleads guilty to 1 misdemeanor count of obstructing official business, and she confirms what investigators suspected. She hadn't signed her name on the custody documents. The 5 other felony charges against her are dismissed.
She had been asked to say that it was her by her daughter, who feared that to tell otherwise would put her in jeopardy.
Prosecutors have to wait more than a year for the case's next major breakthrough.
I am guilty, Your Honor.
On April 22nd, 2021, the 5-year anniversary of the killings, Jake Wagner pleads guilty to 8 counts of aggravated murder.
It's 160 years of prison terms that are not included in the consecutive terms of life imprisonment without parole.
Jake Wagner admitted that he killed
Cooking for one doesn't make sense. If you want to eat better without wasting hours cleaning and prepping or buying
5 members of the Rhoden family, and he shot a 6th, leaving open the question, obviously, of who killed the remaining 3. And in doing so, the deal he worked out with prosecutors was that he would agree to testify against his dad and mom and his older brother, as long as the death penalty was removed from their cases. But it was a huge turning point. This happened. Maybe somebody else is going to do the same.
5 months later, Angela Wagner also accepts a plea deal. But this one is different from her youngest sons. Her confession alleges that she didn't kill any of the Rhoden family members herself.
The 8 murder charges against Angela were removed when she pleaded guilty in September.
She'll be behind bars for 30 years, but avoids the death penalty.
Based solely and strictly upon the defendant's fulfilling her agreement to testify truthfully in each and every of the other co-defendants' trials.
George IV, the oldest brother, his attorneys are also claiming that he didn't shoot anybody, and that's what's been stated in these confessions. And now, of course, it's taking a long time for the court proceedings to unfold. So you can only imagine what the family, the loved ones of the Rhoden family, have been going through.
As of February 2022, the legal cases against Jake's father, Billy Wagner, and his older brother, George IV, are still ongoing.
It's just so incomprehensible. And you just think from a humanistic standpoint, the tragedy of it all, the loved ones who are the survivors, the family that was devastated and still devastated. How can anyone ever understand what took place? It will never leave me, for sure. It's obviously very hard for the communities of Piketon, for Waverly, for Pike County writ large, because that's not something anyone wants associated with where they live.
Your license plate's Pike County, and all you're known for is the murders. Now is the sheriff crooked and all that. They don't paint a pretty picture.
This community needs to heal and get that off the mind because it's been on there a long time.
All right. So I am going to get the George the Third, Billy Wagner's pre-trial hearing up and running. And then we're gonna jump on to that. So give me just a second here. I am trying to get my little YouTube-y thingy to. There we go. All right. So I apologize for that little bit of misinformation. It was 30 years for Angela Wagner, not 40. But still at her age, I mean, she's not getting out until she's like 70 something. So again, that's basically a life sentence for her at this point. By the time she gets out, she'll be too old to do any real harm. And I am pretty sure that Sophia, Bovine, and any additional grandchildren that Angela would have had at that point in time are not going to want to have anything to do with her. So I have the next video up, and we're going to jump right into that.
meetings, check downs to make sure we're prepared for trial. In the first 3 months, I often would huddle up with the lawyers back in.
Now, keep in mind that this is um, a new judge for the case. Um, so it is going to seem a little odd that he is still kind of catching up on the case. But look at how long ago this case happened. We're nearing 10 years ago. And there's so much to this case. So I don't blame this judge for still having a lot of motions and stuff still sitting on his desk that he is not quite ready to address as of Wednesday, or as of Thursday, sorry. But I feel that he has done a good job of covering everything that has happened in the case over the last 8 years. So bear with the judge. I feel that he did a pretty good job, and I only watched a little bit of this. I didn't watch the full thing, so about half of it will be completely brand new to me. The other half will be stuff that I've already listened to.
In chambers. That was a much more informal way for me to get up to speed and learn a little bit about people's personalities. Lawyers can talk more frankly when they're not on a record. I didn't think that that was the best way to do it, but it was the appropriate way to get me up to speed. But in doing that, I would recognize that you don't get to participate, and you get to participate. You're supposed to participate. So I didn't break any rules, but the priority or preference to have you involved at all times is why today we start with everybody in the same place at the same time. So it's a little different on purpose. If you took offense to me huddling up with the lawyers the last 3 months, then just take the apology. So, like, I don't ever have to explain myself, but sometimes it's appropriate to do so. So that's the difference today.
How do you take 20,000 children in the middle of New York City without anybody seeing?
The informality of me being here while you're coming down should not mean that this is not important. It just means that we're past the point of having to have everybody stand up and acknowledge that we're going to do something important. I don't know what we're going to do today, but I know it's important. I've got my list. I suspect the lawyers have theirs. So we'll work our way through this, but the important part is to have you involved all the way through. Understand? Yes? Okay. Let me start out with something I didn't have on my agenda. I'm going to assume that your lawyers are talking to you, but I shouldn't assume anything. So are you having good communication and trial preparation and work with your lawyers? Yeah, thank you. It's important for me not to assume that everything on your side of the room works. If it didn't work, first of all, this is
So I really like that this judge is addressing this case the way that he is by double checking with Billy Wagner that so far his lawyers are up to par. I appreciate that he is explaining why the process has gone the way that it has gone thus far. I also appreciate the fact that he explains some of the things that he was doing to eliminate um future like ineffective assistance of counsel and um those types of appeal issues for the future. Um I really truly appreciate this judge's forethought to this case, to the victims, and to Billy Wagner and his rights. As much as I'm not a fan of the Wagners, I feel that it is important for every accused person to get a trial, a fair trial. And I really feel that no matter how guilty you feel a suspect is, you still need to afford them a truly unbiased trial. Otherwise, you can't really say that they are 100% guilty. And I am a huge fan of, if there is even a little bit of reasonable doubt, you know, you need to really highly consider, is this person truly guilty? Before just relying on like witness statements and things like that. Like, does the actual evidence really show that this person is guilty? And as long as that answer to, does the actual evidence show that this person is 100% guilty, or even at least 90% guilty, then yes, go for it. They are guilty. Now, if you're having to mostly rely on like witness statements and stuff, then that's where I kind of see that there could be room for a lot of error. So like even the Melody Ferris case, take that for example, or even Karen Reed. Those you had to rely on mostly the Ferris children because there wasn't a lot of evidence. And look at how volatile that case is. You know, it definitely has not brought out the best in people. Everybody is fighting, name calling over Melody's guilt or innocence. And in this case, though, I really feel that this case is one of those ones that the evidence does on its own an amazing job of supporting the guilt of this family. So I really feel that so far the Wagners have gotten an incredibly fair set of trials. And this is one of very few cases recently that I can honestly say, while it has taken such a long time to get to this point, that so far these trials have been exactly the way that court trials should be. And so I'm really excited to see what happens.
Intense case, it's meaningful, it's important. Sometimes the intensity and the importance get in the way of communications or relationships. So do you have any like communication problems with any of your lawyers? Do you have any communication problems with any of your lawyers?
No.
Okay. So you're satisfied with the time, the work, the advice they're putting in up to this point?
Yeah, Your Honor.
Okay. I didn't ever say easy, nor will I. There's a lot of pressure on everybody.
Yeah.
It's your life, we understand that. But that doesn't make any of this easy.
Yeah.
So if you have a check in your gut,
Yeah.
you should.
Okay.
I'm going to introduce a new assistant special prosecuting attorney, Mr. O'Brien. So if you look to your right, he's new to the trial, to the case. I approved his admission, if you will, to the state's team. He's a seasoned prosecuting attorney. His reputation in the state's pretty well known, not an unfamiliar person. So that's just a new person, and they're allowed to sub in extra lawyers as they think is necessary, subject to the court's approval, and there's no reason not to. So that's the new face. Understand? Okay, that makes sense. All right. Now, for benefit of the record, I need to acknowledge the victims are participating. The court's not responsible, the state is, So I look back there and I see people sitting in the victim's seats. So for benefit of the record, they also participate because they have a right to. So that sets the stage for everybody's where they ought to be at this time. So now we're going to have just a discussion about what it takes to get ready to bring this case to the trial stage. So I'm just going to kind of lean back, take notes, ask questions, poke at people, and have a conversation about what it takes to be ready. Understand? Yeah. Okay. So when we last left off, Ms. Konepka was going to give a full disclosure of witnesses for the state and then also a realistic pared down version. So how's that process for the state?
Your Honor, I provided that witness list. I believe October 21st is the date that I have. I provided a list that had 357 or some witnesses. That is not the pared down list. And then I also provided a pared down list with little notes to the side about this person responded to this scene or whatever, just to kind of even give further help on that. So that was completed.
Do you have a realistic understanding, plus or minus whatever your margin of error is, about the number of witnesses who will actually be called?
50. Some much shorter than others.
Mr. Collins?
And Your Honor, that may go lower depending on, we are in the process of talking about stipulations. So
yeah, thank you.
We're going to be of a different mindset than the trial that was before us.
Okay, so 50 or less?
Yes, Your Honor.
And nobody's getting committed or locked in. I'm trying to make sure we're where we ought to be 6 weeks out. Was there also like any additional or new discovery that was provided? Something new that you didn't know about or wasn't previously provided?
In regards to venue, Your Honor?
No. I'm talking about substantive evidence. Sorry.
No, there's not been anything new.
I think that's right, Mr. Hayes, Mr. Collins. Like, did you see anything new?
I don't believe there's been discussions where there's necessarily anything new from the other trial. There were discussions at one point in time about trying to obtain pretty much the evidence logs of the first trial. You know, the discovery in this case, it was produced years ago, and it was produced kind of in different segments that wasn't as...
It wasn't a felony child notebook that I could just copy.
It was a...
Give me just a second, guys. Okay, guys, I apologize. I am going to have to end the live stream soon, or now. My dog is acting really weird, so I am trying to make sure that he is okay. I may have to take him to the vet. I appreciate everybody's patience, and thank you very much for joining me today. I will pick this back up a little bit later, and hopefully everything's okay with the dog.